We are now learning that the release of the now infamous Access Hollywood recording during the election campaign may have caused Michael Cohen to reverse course on a decision. The Wall Street Journal reports that President Trump's former personal attorney initially resisted the idea of paying adult film star Stormy Daniels hush money, this in September of 2016. But according to the Journal, the day after that tape was released in October 2016, Cohen informed a representative for Daniels that he was now open to a deal. Daniels claims that she had a consensual sexual encounter with Trump before he was president. Let's bring back now Laura Coates and Glenn Kirshner. So Laura, why is that timing important to the legality of that payment?
Because it shows you just how much the actual impending campaign and the election was going to be on the decision of whether or not to silence Stephanie Clifford, aka Stormy Daniels. The closer you get to that point in time where the election may have been impacted, the more you think about the campaign contributions that are made and campaign finance violations that may result if you were trying to silence somebody and it's in excess of that payment. And so the fact that before the Access Hollywood tape came out, he was not receptive to it, and then all of a sudden you had this idea of grabbing them by the proverbial P word all of a sudden, makes it seem like it may not be elected, and you want to silence somebody who would give indication that he somehow was an unsavory being all the more. That's why it's so important.
Okay, so Glenn, to be clear, as Laura was saying, then that money to pay off Stormy Daniels becomes a misuse of campaign funds? Is that the idea?
Yeah, you know, this is really one that we have to apply just a common sense test to. These deals that were struck, these payments that were made, these shell corporations that were set up to pass money through, this was all to impact the election and Trump's chances of being elected. I mean, I don't think anybody is sort of pulling a fast one by suggesting that, well, maybe Michael Cohen, out of the goodness of his own heart, because of his affection for Trump, made these payments. I mean, it just doesn't pass the laugh test.
Now, on this issue, and this is something we've seen before, the president's story on the payment has changed. Right. You'll remember that initially he said that he didn't know anything about it. Then he tweeted that Cohen did it to stop a false allegation by Stormy Daniels. And then Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, said that the president did reimburse Cohen for the payment. So, of course, the president was involved. Does that changing story, beyond what it means publicly, in a legal sense, does that matter?
Yes, it goes back. Remember, this is also about the non-disclosure agreement that has a case in California right now led by Michael Avenatti, which is largely based on the idea that one of the reasons that the NDA may be, you cannot abide by it or honor it, is because it may be in contravention of campaign finance laws. You cannot uphold a contract that is intending to make illegal activity under the radar. You can't do that. And so when you think about what the story is, it's changing. You think about the motivation, the intent. Think about the Air Force One comment that the president had to the press pool. You think about the fact that David Dennison signed onto it, and you have this changing story. A court of law is looking at this and saying, well, perhaps you were intending to deceive not only the public, but perhaps a court into thinking you can uphold this NDA, and that's also a problem.
Glenn, Michael Cohen is under investigation by federal officials for his business dealings. So beyond the payments, beyond his involvement with the president, just his business dealings, taxi medallions, you name it, in New York. Of course, the question is, is that legal pressure sufficient enough, in your view, your former prosecutor, to push him to testify against the president if there is something he can testify against the president on? You
know, Jim, it sure seems like there's a lot of pressure on Michael Cohen. And, you know, we have to remember that although Bob Mueller referred out a piece of the Cohen investigation to the Southern District of New York, that doesn't mean he hasn't retained a great big hunk of the Michael Cohen investigation for himself, as it may relate to Russian collusion. Because, you know, he has a mandate from the Deputy Attorney General regarding the scope of his investigation, and I think he's being very careful to abide by that. When he finds something unrelated to Russian collusion, he refers it out to the appropriate U.S. Attorney's Office, whether in New York or, as we see with Paul Manafort, one across the river in the Eastern District of Virginia. But I'll tell you, I would bet he still retained a large chunk of the Michael Cohen investigation for himself because it likely does relate to contacts between Russia and the campaign.
None of this is ending soon. That's for sure. Laura, Glenn, thanks very much.